Yeah. So each person is allotted a certain amount of joy versus pain in life, and I'm sure it changes. Whatever the details of that are. So, for example, say God gives a person an illness, a pain on his leg, which makes it hard for him to walk. But then he gives him a job where he's sitting down, versus his friend who has healthy legs, but then he has to work a more laborious job.
Let's start with the premise now. You're starting with the premise that each person is allotted a certain amount of
joy versus pain.
Meaning before he's created, it's pre-programmed for him how much joy he will have and how much pain he'll have?
Whenever that premise takes place.
I don't know that it ever takes place. Well, why would you think that it's preordained at any time? Why wouldn't the person's actions have an input into the conditions of life that he lives under? I think it's normal, and the form that I know.
So it's constantly evolving based on the person's. It's a two-way communication, let's say.
I think there's room for both. There could be certain limits that are set for a person. That could be, right. But within the limits, it's certainly a fact that the actions of a person will change the amount of joy he has and the amount of pain that he has.
So if a person he works hard and is learning, and now when he learns, he experiences a lot of joy.
Okay.
Right? So we say suffering is good. So is the joy that a person feels with his spirituality, does that take away from the suffering is good?
Oh, hold on. So let me repeat this because you say that a person works hard on his learning, and therefore will have a lot of joy in learning. Now we say suffering is good. Does the fact that he's having joy take away? Where do we say that suffering is good?
I know it's brought up in the Gemara that suffering leads to goodness in the next world.
Only when the suffering is necessary, is brought upon a person by the actions that he requires, some kind of corrective, some kind of awakening, some kind of atonement, things he's done wrong. But it doesn't mean that a life without suffering is a substandard life. King David says, serve God with joy. It does not say serve God with suffering.
There's a Gemara that says, fortunate is the righteous man who is treated like the evil man in the next world is treated, but the righteous man is treated in this world that way, like the evil man is treated in the next world, and woe to the evil man who's treated in this world like the righteous man is treated in the next world.
Okay, there's going to be a lot of corrections to go on through. I'll repeat this one. I'll explain to you this one, but the sources are not being used nearly to what they mean. Happy is the righteous person who's treated in this world like the evil man, and woe to the evil man who's quote treated in this world like the righteous man, because the place in which real compensation for the life that you live is the world to come. Now, a righteous person doesn't mean that he's perfect. Doesn't mean he has no faults. So if he pays off for his faults in this world, he goes into the next world perfect, without any liabilities, and there's for him nothing but joy in the next world. Whereas the wicked person, if he gets paid off in happiness and in pleasure in this world, it means he's not going to the world to come. He's being paid off here for the mitzvahs that he did, and now his life is bankrupt. He's going to disappear. He's not going to be there at all. That's what the Gemara is talking about. Talking about compensating so as to change the outcome of the world to come. But it's not an absolute rule. It's not an absolute rule. There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. Torah im derech eretz. Torah together with let's say an occupation, mashkachas avon, that they cause sin to be forgotten. Says the Meshech Chochmah, this Mishnah is talking about somebody who has a payload of sin that needs to be undone. So he should be studying Torah and have a job, because the two of them together cause sin to be forgotten. But it's not for everybody. It says specifically it's for a person who needs sin to be forgiven. These statements are narrow statements referring to specific particular categories. They can't be taken generally to apply across the board. The mere fact that someone has less suffering than somebody else does not mean that his life is inferior in any way. You know, when you want to motivate people, there's the carrot and the stick. Nowhere is it written that you must always use both the carrot and the stick. Sometimes the carrot is enough, and the person is drawn by inspiration, and he can have a perfect life. Doesn't have to have suffering in it. There's more to be said, but I think that the sources have to be taken.
So would it be wrong for a person who things are going well in life? I'm not that he stubs his toe and whatever, but things are going well in life. Would it be wrong for him to feel? Would it be a lack of bitachon for him to feel bad that he's losing out, let's say, in his world to come? That's a deficit in the trust that this isn't what's best.
Yeah, okay. The person feel bad because his things are going well in life. The Gemara asks you a question. The Gemara says a person who has no pain and frustration in this world should worry that he's losing out in the world to come. He should worry. The Gemara says, what counts as pain and frustration? Put your hand in your pocket for one coin, you pull out a different coin. That's pain and frustration. Forget it. Don't worry. That's enough. After that, don't worry. You're not being paid in this world necessarily. That's how much, pain and frustration is enough to justify life. Once upon a time, once in a while, pulling out the wrong coin. That's it. All right. You've had your pain and frustration. Don't worry about losing your word in the world to come. These are things that are nuanced, and as in all statements in Chazal, they have very narrow defining conditions. They apply only under very special conditions. And to take them and make them into general rules, in general, you have to be suspicious of reading any general rule into a statement that you find in the Chazal. Be very suspicious about it. Rabbi Yochanan said, "Ein lamedim min haklos." We do not learn from general statements. Even if the general statement specifies exceptions, there are other exceptions which weren't specified. As we learn to be cautious and self-suspicious when you're taking a statement and reading it as if it was yours. We go on somebody else. There's other questions. Yeah.
So just going back to Derech Hashem a little bit, what does ashpa mean? I just wanted the definition of ashpa.
You mean Miriam me ashpos evyon? Is that what you mean?
Yes, ashpos.
So the ashpa they translate as a trash heap, a place where garbage is.
Yeah, but it says in Derech Hashem, it says kol ashpaos be'atikunim, like it's all the trashes. That's it.
Well, I don't know where you're reading. I don't know what you're referring to.
And even the translation says ashpa.
Kasha? No, hashpaos.
Ashpa.
With a hey, not with an aleph.
Okay.
Hashpaos. Not trashies. No.
It's the H. I don't know.
Hashpa is a word. You're right, but 1 second. 160. He has a long essay here about what this is.
Yeah.
Hashpa'ah in Hebrew is based on the word shefa. Shefa means something that pours out and flows. And when it's referring to the Creator, it's a kind of energy that flows from the Creator, created by the Creator, to flow into our world and to bring about certain effects. Lahashpia means to influence in Hebrew. Literally it means to transfer a shefa to someone, to give over to him a shefa. So he's talking now about the order of creation, which has various different levels, and the top levels are called hashpaos. Those are energies that HaKadosh Baruch Hu put into the world, and those energies both create and govern the levels beneath them. Each level creates and governs the level beneath it, till you finally come down to tables, chairs, and mosquitoes. Right? And in between there are spiritual beings like angels and like human souls, and so it's a very, very general term, and it just means the way in which God brings about the world to run. That's how I would describe it. Very difficult word to translate into English because
even the translator
I mean, the whole thought system is a different thought system, so, you're not going to get a direct translation. Yeah, what else?
You mean to pick up?
Yeah. You have the right edition. You have a very good
Yeah,
edition. Yeah. That's, yeah.
So I know my question's like very wordy, but
Let's
like
see.
earlier today you were talking about like angels and like how they praise Hashem with certain phrases and they got it from prophets and things. It's like so my question is like who exactly, like what is an angel, and then like do they have like a physical like description, like what do they look like? If they do, if they're physical, like what do they look like? And then like if there's like a certain amount of them, like does Hashem like create more at sometimes and like other times there's less of them? And then like I heard like there's like the Ophanim and the Seraphim and the Koichai, so there's like a difference between them. So it's like,
Okay, the subject is angelology. What categories angels are, what are they, and are they physical, and does it create more or less of them? They divide in different categories. I'll give you some headlines off the top. I can't do a complete description. The usual understanding is that angels are totally non-physical. They're totally non-physical. When you have descriptions, they are, some of them, descriptions of visions that prophets have. Now, I want you to understand an important ambiguity, both in English and in Hebrew. When you say, let's say, Peter's picture could mean one of three entirely different things. One is that Peter owns the picture. One is that Peter created the picture. And the third is that the picture depicts Peter. It describes Peter. Even that could be taken in a variety of ways. Is it what we might call a literal depiction, or is it a symbolic depiction? If you see an architect's plans for a building, you will not recognize a building on the paper, not unless you're trained to read the arbitrary symbols of an architect. And of course, the two-dimensional paper describing a three-dimensional building, so something's got to give somewhere. So when you talk about a picture, it doesn't have to mean that the way the picture looks is the way the thing looks. We have a phrase in the Torah about describing Moses, Usmunas Hashem Yabit. He gazes at God's picture. So a 6-year-old with a dictionary will say, well, so God has a visual appearance because Moses is gazing at his picture. That's because he's taking God's picture to mean a picture that depicts God in literal terms. Of course, that's not true, because no picture could possibly do that. It means a picture that God created. It means that a picture that God created in order to communicate something about God, but not its literal depiction. Any more than if you describe a person as a lion, that you mean that he lives in the forest. You mean you're depicting his courage and his strength and the impression that he makes on people, rather than depicting, that he has long golden hair and he lives in the forest. So, angels have no physical form whatsoever. Nevertheless, prophets are given pictures of angels, meaning they are pictures that are designed to depict some of the features that angels have. There are appearances that God causes people to have about angels, and exactly how to explain whether they are in a prophetic trance, the way Maimonides takes it, or whether God creates something in the world that expresses the presence of the angel, but it's not the angel itself. You can't see something that has no physicality to it. So all these things are just offshoots of angelic characters over the soul. Now, if you ask what an angel is, I would say, a crystallization of divine action. God does everything. Don't think that God creates angels and goes on vacation and comes back and makes an inspection once a month. No, and Maimonides as a philosopher and the Ramchal as a Kabbalist both say exactly the same thing. There's a whole hierarchy of forces and controls that are created, and God is present at every level in the hierarchy, and He manages and directs everything that happens at every level, and He directs everything that every entity does at every level. Right? So then you ask, well, what are the levels for? Right? Certainly not to make it easier for Himself. Not creating a committee that so He can go on vacation from time to time. But God has decided to run our world by acting within certain categories. That's a decision that He took. The angels set up categories of action. And then what you said is absolutely true. There are different names for the different groups of angels, which we find in the prophets. And they are different groups. And they have occupied different places on the hierarchy. And they have different types of control, some more general and some more specific. So, but they are really, the best way to think about them is they are stylized divine actions. And different divine actions will take place at different levels of the hierarchy, because different principles are active at different levels of the hierarchy. That's really what's going on, roughly anyway. Yeah.
If a person fulfills 90% of his potential in life, and then he dies, is the 10% that he didn't fulfill forever lost to him, or is that rectified somehow with Gehinnom or Gottleib or?
Okay, it's an interesting question. If a person fulfills 90% of his potential and then dies, what happens to the other 10%? Now, the picture that the Kabbalists have is that we are put into the world to achieve certain perfections, in the plural, because for human beings there are many different types of perfections. And you're given a soul which is capable of developing those perfections. And it happens that a person throughout his lifetime does not fulfill all his potential, as you say. That means there are some parts of the soul whose potential never got realized. Certain perfections were never accomplished. And the picture that the Arizal gives us is the parts of the soul that do get perfected are taken out of circulation. They're already put in a waiting pattern for Olam Haba, and only the parts that didn't get perfected come back. And if you will ask, but Rabbi, how can part of a soul come back? You know, you need a human being. And the soul has all the features that a human being needs to be able to function. If you take a little part, you know, maybe it'll amount to a left leg. Or maybe it'll amount to just a sense of smell. I mean, how can you possibly take a part of a soul and have it go back by itself? The answer is that everything, this is really what they call, Mandelbrot sets, the self-similarity, where when you take an item and zoom in on a piece of it, you find that the piece has the same basic structure as the whole. The structure repeats at different levels of analysis. So when you imagine, let's say the soul has 10 parts, 1 through 10. If you take a look at part number 6, 6 divides up into 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, 6.4, down to 6.10. Under 6 itself, there's a substructure of another 10. So 6 could come back by itself, because it contains within it a miniature of the structure of the whole. That's roughly what goes on, and this is infinitely divisible. So no matter what level you get to in perfection, if you leave something out, then it can go back as a part because it subdivides again. That happens enough times until the job is finished. So yes, it's not lost. This is what Gilgal does, what Reincarnation does. It gives that opportunity. In fact, the Zohar, I happened to be looking for something in the Zohar, and I came across a passage, and I think it was the passage of Mishpatim, where it says, woe to the person who doesn't finish the job in one lifetime. Because if he doesn't finish the job in one lifetime, then the part of his soul that didn't get perfected is going to come back by itself, which is a much thinner soul, much thinner spirituality. And then there's going to be a body which gets that soul, And that body is going to have a thin soul, a weak soul, a soul that's not built on the dimensions of an original soul. And that's a tragedy for that body. It's a tragedy for that this resulting person. So you're better off to avoid that if you possibly can. So it's an explicit Zohar that sort of thing happens. Now the Arizal wrote a book about Reincarnation. It's about this thick, 300 pages. There's lots of details which I don't know, but that part I do know. So that I think is the right answer. And the purpose of our stage of history is to create human perfections, and the job has to be finished. And it will be, however long it takes and however many repetitions it takes, the job has to be finished. Yeah, what else? People came to watch the show. Yeah.
So if I'm not mistaken, in Plato's theory of forms, he surmises that there is sort of a perfect absolute world that shines qualities, in a sense, onto this world. We see sort of imperfections in our physical world here. Is that, and I may be getting the interpretation wrong, but is that a way that we can view the attributes of God, in a sense?
Let's see if I can give you an analogy to what's going on here. You're asking whether Plato's idea of the form of the good and the way it relates to our world with its imperfections could be a tool for understanding the way the Torah looks at God's relationship to the world. It would be something like saying to a potter, I want you to make me a vessel to hold water, and I want it to have a gentle curve. I'll tell you what I mean. It's sort of like Einstein's relativity, where gravity produces curved space-time. So, give it a curve like that, like curved space-time. I don't think he'll be able to use that as a guide how to use the clay on his potter's wheel. I mean, it's like, curved space-time comes out of a whole system of thought with specific concepts, specific applications, and borrowing that for a bowl. It's just two different. Now, Plato is a whole thought system, and it's a thought system with a picture of what the human being is and what the cosmos is and all the rest of it. And also these words, and these words are taken out of Plato's system and try to graft them onto the Torah's picture. I think you're risking taking something from one culture and transferring it to another culture where it really is not. One thing's for sure, neither Plato nor Aristotle has any concept of a creator. There's no creator. Well, the minute you leave out the idea that God is the creator, you've got a total falsification. You can't approach the idea of God if you don't have the idea that God is creator. And he doesn't have it. There's no such thing as creation ex nihilo, neither for Plato nor for Aristotle. So even though in the translations of their works you will find God, one shouldn't confuse it with what the Torah's picture of what God is. Yeah.
I remember reading or hearing something in the name of their own call that a person can't really learn Torah until he's in the place where he's beyond his thoughts or he's outside his thoughts. Do you have any idea what I'm talking about?
No, I unless you're reading English translation of a Hebrew passage and then they're using that English translation in a place where I wouldn't use it. I don't recognize the idea that he can't really learn Torah until he's outside of his thoughts. I mean, 6-year-olds learn Torah.
Right, that was my question.
Well, okay, it doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound right. If you told me you can't learn it perfectly, that would make it much easier. That applies to 1/100th of 1% of the population. But if you say no one can, then it seems to be grossly false. It's just to demand something as grandiose as getting outside of your thoughts. And also, a great deal of Torah is in words. to say that you're just fooling yourself when you learn the words, when you memorize the words, and use the words and define the words, you're just fooling yourself. That's not really learning Torah. That for sure is wrong.
Maybe you as a person can't master Torah. Again,
But then I don't remember him ever talking about mastering Torah. In particular, because in the way of God, he says at least 3 times, in particular about the study of Torah, that all of the reward you get is for your effort. You only get reward for effort. And with respect to Torah, one of the ways of fulfilling what the Torah wants from us in terms of interacting with Torah is pronouncing the words without understanding. Hege. Just pronouncing the sounds already is a fulfillment, not the greatest fulfillment, but a fulfillment, and it attaches you to the highest hashpah that is attached to Torah. Just pronouncing the words without even understanding them. So, this is totally foreign to me. This quote. Yeah.
Is a Jew allowed to teach a goy certain aspects of Torah?
Is a Jew allowed to teach a non-Jew certain aspects of Torah? Absolutely. In fact, the Gemara says that a non-Jew who learned Torah could be greater than the high priest who is ignorant of Torah. High priest being Jewish. Now, the Torah has rules for non-Jews. So they're not going to be able to follow those rules unless they study the rules of the Torah that tell them what to do. And that includes certain aspects of belief. In particular, for example, Maimonides says that a non-Jew, by his actions, earns a place in the world to come only if he believes the commandments that he fulfills were given to Moses at Sinai. So the non-Jew has to know there was a revelation at Sinai, and there was someone called Moses. He has to know about that. Otherwise, he can't fulfill the commandments that he was given. So there's no question the teaching Torah to a non-Jew is appropriate, but not all of it. It's called Morosha L'Kilas Yaakov. Morosha L'Kilas Yaakov. Morosha means an inheritance, and Chazal darshan it as Ma'orasa, as if it's married to the Jewish people. There are certain aspects which are private to the Jewish people. And yes, I know your English translation says Ma'orasa means engaged, but the word engaged is not a Hebrew concept altogether. Erison is really Kiddushin, and Kiddushin means that you are man and wife, although not yet living together. And therefore certain monetary obligations might not apply. But you are man and wife, and any infidelity is adultery, and so on and so on. The use of word engaged there is very misleading to an English speaker. Engagement in English is just a promise. It's nothing more than that. Erison in Hebrew is much more than that. It's an actual marriage bond. Yeah.
Is it a requirement in Judaism that in order to propose a chidush, do you require to have a full knowledge of all the approaches, interpretations? Like, what are the requirements so that you can say, okay, now I can propose a chidush?
Okay, that's an interesting question. Okay, what requirements should be fulfilled before you can propose a new Torah idea? I'm going to express something which may make me unpopular. There are people who they send their boys off to Yeshiva Ketana at the ripe old age of 13 or 14. They give them a notebook, and the title of the notebook is Chidushei Torah. New, novel Torah ideas that this 14-year-old is going to come up with in yeshiva. Well, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that all those books have one thing in common. Every idea in them is wrong. Every idea in them is wrong. Wrong. For sure it's wrong. Why would you want to aggrandize, give a title to the brand new Torah thoughts of your 14-year-old? Give him a book in which he can write down the summaries of the lectures that he hears, or the summaries of the material he learns in the Talmud, so he can memorize it and analyze it, and he can get credit for having summarized it correctly, accurately, and in an organized fashion. But to invite him to create new ideas, now, you asked the question in a very specific way. What's the background necessary to propose a new Torah idea? Why not ask the following question: what is the background that's required to ask whether a certain new idea is correct or not? You're sitting in class, and the teacher is teaching, and he explains certain concepts, and you say, wow, seems to me that if these and these things are true, then this also ought to be true. It seems to me. Am I right or am I wrong? That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Everyone should be encouraged to do that. Yes, to think on your own, to think creatively, so as to ask a meaningful question. Not to make a new contribution to Torah knowledge, so that this new idea will be enshrined in official literature, and 200 years from now they'll say, here's the Chiddush, the idea that so-and-so said, and he added to our Torah understanding. I mean, that's very, very grandiose.
Yeah.
That's very grandiose. Indeed, I think that the only genuine way to have the credit for having proposed a new idea is to ask the question the way I said, and have the teacher say, wow, that's new because I've learned all the commentaries here.
Yeah.
And I know that none of them say it. And seems to me to fit. And then he'll talk about it to other people, and they can confirm that this really is a new Torah idea. But you're never going to be, I mean, I shouldn't put blinders on your horizon, but the vast majority of us will never be in a position where they can really take credit, or even have the rash boldness to think that they've added to Torah literature. How many hundreds of Svarim are there today on any given subject? How in heaven's name would you know that it's really new? I think it's for us, it's just an impossibility. And I'll tell you something else. I know for myself that when I'm learning a piece of Gemara, and I have a thought, and I look in the back where I have my commentaries, and I see that someone said it, that makes my day. Not that I said something new, but I said something old, but I got to it on my own. My mind went down the same pathway as the Ritva. That's thrilling. That's really thrilling. And I cover academia, where you're supposed to at least pretend that you're creating new ideas, and I publish papers and so forth and so on. But they're new, all right. And then so I just saw now one major research development in Alzheimer's disease. Over the last 15 years, hundreds of papers have been published with photographs of brain sectors and everything else, and it seems like the whole thing is phony. Phony! The guy who founded it doctored the pictures. They're not genuine pictures, and published in Nature and the best journals, peer-reviewed. Oh, those peers, they really get it. They pick up everything. You know, I mean, so, you know, that's what you call creating new ideas and contributing to the march of progress in science. Give me a break. Peer review. I peer reviewed papers for journals. You don't get paid for it. Your name doesn't appear. You get no credit for it. Why should you take it seriously? There's nothing in it for you. Peer review is a joke. Peer reviewed. Anyway, so I don't think that should be the way in which we strive to understand what the previous generation said. The better I understand it, the more confirmation I have that I understand it. One of the most thrilling things to me is when I look at a Gemara and I ponder and I can't make sense out of it. I can't make it work. And I look into the later commentaries and they say the text is wrong. Yes, there's no way to make sense out of it. There isn't, because that's not the right text. Oh, what a vindication that is. What a pleasure that is. I didn't make a stupid mistake. No, the text was miscopied. Yeah, was noch?
So Hashem created Earth for man. What was the reason for all the other planets in our galaxy or atmosphere?
What's the reason for, let's say, the whole of the universe, since the Earth was created for man? Reasons come in different sizes, and they are, I'll give you two which are, I think, quite unexpected. Rav Desta says There's more than enough of everything. Don't let them fool you. There isn't enough land, there aren't enough resources, there isn't enough food, so there's enough water. Baloney. First of all, I've been saying that for 100 years, and they've been predicting that the earth would crash, 20 times in the last 100 years. It didn't happen. It's all hype. But he says, the message of it is, if you don't have, it's not because God ran out of resources. If you don't have, it's because He didn't want you to have. Whereas if it were measured exactly, you think, well, then somebody's going to be missing. It's not right. But let me tell you something. It's a little history of science. You know what a Gedanken experiment is? Where you think up a situation and you imagine what would happen. When you figure out what would happen, you draw conclusions from it. The most famous Gedanken experiment in the whole history of science is Newton's bucket experiment. People had the thought that motion is relative. Am I moving at this moment? Well, not relative to the table, but relative to the sun I am. When you ask is something moving, what you really mean is there a relationship of motion between the two things? That would require the distances between them to change. Or some other kind of spatial relationship to change. So motion is relative. Newton said that's a mistake. There is at least some absolute motion. And here's how he proved it. So imagine a bucket that's half full of water. And you got a handle and you have a rope. And tie the rope, let's say, to the limb of a tree. Now, it's half full of water. Slowly wind it in one direction. So that the rope is now wound. Let go. So the rope is going to say unwind. And the bucket is going to revolve. Rotate. It's going to rotate, right? What's going to happen? So imagine someone, a miniature, sitting on the rim of the bucket. He looks up. What does he see? Well, he sees everything going round and round. Well, is that because he's going round and round and seeing it, or because he's sitting and it's going round and round? Motion is relative. There's round and round between him and what he sees in the sky. Between the two of them, there's a round and round motion. That's all you can say. That's relative motion. Now Newton says, look down. You look down at the bucket, what are you going to see? You're going to see the water climbing up the sides of the bucket. What we call centrifugal force, which is conservation of angular momentum. I know that, okay. So centrifugal force pushing the water, as he says, that shows you that it's the bucket that's turning around. That's what's forcing the water up the sides, right? If you spun the galaxies, that wouldn't pull the water up the sides of the bucket. So that shows you there's such a thing as absolute motion. That was Newton's Gedanken experiment. Along came Maxwell in the 19th century and said, no, I think if you spun the galaxies, the water would go up. I think it's the relative motion that pulls the water up the sides, not the motion of the bucket per se as an absolute motion. I disagree with Newton. Meaning, if there were just a bucket, the water wouldn't go up. The water wouldn't go up. If there were just the earth, ping pong wouldn't work. Water wouldn't flow through pipes. Things would be very different. The rest of the universe is physically necessary for our inertial phenomena taking place on the earth to exist. Boy, oh boy, wouldn't that be surprising? That all that stuff out there is making it possible for us to drink a cup of water. Otherwise it wouldn't work. Now I have asked people who are experts in this area whether in Einstein's relativity, Maxwell's relative motion is packed in there or not. I got the very disappointing answer that we can't tell. We don't know whether Einstein's relativity is committed to Maxwell's principle or not committed to Maxwell's principle. But that's a big surprise, hey, when you think about the fact that all those stars and galaxies and all the rest could be contributing to the way inertial motion acts on the Earth. This is a theme, leave alone the supposed Copernican revolution, which is baloney, but this is a theme which is verifiable. Things are connected in ways that we never dreamt. You tell somebody 300 years ago the plankton in the ocean is dying out, his answer would be, oh, so there'll be less drag on the ships. It'll be easier to sail across the ocean. What about the food chain? Food chain? What's that? Well, with no plankton, there won't be any tuna. Because the little is eaten by the little bigger, the bigger, bigger, bigger. You take stuff out of the bottom, so then you're not going to have any food in the ocean. Things are connected in ways that we never dreamt. I'm giving you an example of a connection between the whole vast matter of the universe and the phenomena on the face of the earth. So that's a second message. Ramchal is a third message, and he says that God's providence of the world is based on principles, certain large general principles, and trillions of little principles governing every detail of the world. And for each principle of God's providence, there's a creature that embodies that principle. Why it has to be that way, I don't know, but there's got to be an isomorphism between the abstract set of principles on the one hand and the actual creatures in the world on the other hand. So that being the case, the planets and the galaxies and the rest carry this material expression of these abstract principles. That's the third thing that they could be doing in the world. And I'm sure that there are 24 other things that they could be doing that I'm not aware of. It's a good question. Things have to serve a purpose. They're not here for no purpose. Yeah.
Can you explain some of the significance of Kiddush Levana? Because it strikes me as a seemingly weird activity. It's almost idolatrous. It seems almost idolatrous, and yet it's not. So.
Kiddush Levana. It seems idolatrous. Gee. Do you look at the text? Do you read it in a language you understand? Well, do we ask the moon for anything? Do we praise the moon? Do we bow to the moon? Do we pray to God? We pray to God on the occasion of the fact that the moon is waxing, having gone through a period of waning and disappearing. But it's just a natural phenomenon. No different from making a blessing when you see the sea, or you see the mountain, or you see a rainbow. We make blessings. We're not worshiping them. It's not idolatrous. This doesn't even get off the ground as a thought of being idolatrous. We say that the moon, as it says in the Genesis story, there were two big lights, and then God made one of the lights smaller, and that indicates a certain brokenness of the world in which we live, and we're looking forward to the time that's promised in the future when that brokenness will be overcome. And we wax and wane. The moon is a symbol of the Jewish people. Wax and wane sometimes even seem to disappear, but then always arise and reassert ourselves. I think most people agree that you would have shared today's reality as a vision with people who just had come out of the Holocaust. They would find it impossible to believe. Even great tzaddikim would find it impossible to believe. Here we are, 80 years later. The Mir Yeshiva in Jerusalem has 10,000 students. One yeshiva. Lakewood in New Jersey has, last count I heard, was 7,000. Probably it's more than that. Another single yeshiva with 7,000 students. And the big Hasidic movements that have tens and tens of thousands of families. Did anybody dream of something like that? So that's the waxing and the waning of the moon, but it doesn't even get off the ground as a problem of idolatry. Ja, was noch? Yeah.
So I noticed, I think when I came to Israel, like after praying, I noticed we said like also during Mark too, but I think I've heard Baruch Hashem of Baruch. Like why do we say like after we're done praying?
Mi Baruch Hu.
Yeah, Baruch Hu, yeah. Why do you do Baruch Hu? Like,
That is a something which Sephardim do. You have to understand the different areas of the world express the positions of certain great authorities. The authority whose positions, whose decisions were dominant in the land of Israel was Yosef Karo, who was the Sephardi author of the Shulchan Aruch, And therefore, there are some things that even Ashkenazi congregations do because of his influence. And part of the reason for that is that around the year 1900, when this area of the world was under the control of the Turks, they made a rule that Jerusalem shouldn't have any more Jewish residents. So of course, Jews were sneaking in, but the local population was Sephardi. So if an Ashkenazi is going to come in, dressed like someone from Europe, he's going to be dead. Turks are going to find him in 2 hours, and he'll be out. So they took on Sephardi dress, and then they davened with the Sephardi congregations, and so on, so as to be invisible to the Turks. So Ashkenazim took on certain Sephardi customs for that reason. So I think that's what's going on there. Yeah, sorry, in the back. Yeah.
Is there any role in the study of ethics for practical use, or should we just focus on studying Torah?
Now there are at least really two separate ideas there, even in so few words. Ethics,
Yeah.
and then Torah. Like, ethics is what you should do, how you should behave. If there isn't any practical role on the basis of studying ethics, then something's gone terribly wrong. The whole purpose of studying ethics is to know what should be done, what's good, what's evil. I mean, that definitely should have practical. Now, as far as Torah is concerned, so originally, let's say 2,000 years ago, when the Talmud formulated the rules of study of Torah, a great emphasis was put on studying practical Torah, maybe in depth, to know where it comes from, but to choosing practical subjects as opposed to subjects which are very far from practical, like the laws of sacrifices, let's say, or something like that. That's been modified over the centuries for various reasons, but there definitely is a value in studying Torah. And if you, for example, to learn Torah in depth, starting with Talmud and working it through, but there are tractates of Talmud that deal with practical laws. So that would definitely make sense. I'm not saying everyone has to do it. I'm not saying someone who doesn't do it is doing wrong, but it would definitely make sense. Tractate of Sabbath, for example, is a long, complex tractate with an enormous amount of information about how to keep the Sabbath. And there are other tractates which have similar emphasis. It definitely would make sense. Indirectly, study of Talmud has two great effects. First of all, it teaches you how to think. I hope that learning how to think will be practical. I hope so. I think that's something which we pray for. And then Torah study, Torah sources, every subject is interacting with every other subject. You may have to build a chain. Talmud often has on one page 16 different subjects running at the same time because the themes and the principles apply throughout. So it's very rare. We're learning Ksubas now in the Daf Yomi, but in Ksubas you have agricultural laws, and you have laws of testimony, and you have, Ksubas means documents, by the way. It doesn't mean marriage contracts, it means documents. But it's connected to a vast variety of subjects. So it'd be hard to find, let's say, let's study the laws of sacrifices, but prayer is designed to correspond to the sacrifices. So if you have a broad enough mind, you say, aha, sacrifices are like this, and then the prayer is supposed to be related to that, then the prayer should be like that. You can usually find some kind of practical application. So yeah, the study of Torah should have an attitude of, I would like to know how to live from this. Not always will you get it directly, but you should have that. Okay, I've got to go.